Hello there, everybody, and welcome to a special chat, albeit that one with a heavy heart that we have to have here, as I'm joined by three very special guests to talk about the ACA split and rationality rules and all that stuff that you'd have heard me talk to Essence of Thought about previously as well. So, hello there, ladies.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello there. Yes, I'm joined by Jen, Claire, and Tracie, formerly of the ACA. And I'm just going to ask them up top to briefly explain who they are, basically, what their connection with the Atheist Community of Austin was, and then we'll get into the topics at hand. So I'll just go with the order that they are on the screen. Firstly, hello there, Clare Wuellner.
Oh, I'm not first on my screen, but I'll go. Clare Wuellner. I've been on the ACA board for 6 years. I was, and I rebooted Godless Bitches, which is something I'm really super proud of. I think that was such a rewarding project. And I started Parenting Beyond Belief. And again, I've gotten such great feedback about that show, the impact it's had on people. I've also appeared on the Atheist Experience, Talk Heathen, Secular Sexuality, the Atheist Roundtable. Is that all of them? That's most of the shows. And I've worked very hard in that community for 6 years, and then in the atheist community at large for 20 years to build community. That's always been my explicit goal. Back when I started as the executive director for Center for Inquiry here in Austin, one of my big goals was to get CFI and the ACA talking again, because they'd had a tremendous falling out. And I succeeded, and that was the start of building community in my mind. And then I wanted to see more diversity in people attending meetings. Often I was the only woman there, and there certainly weren't any people of color. And over time that has changed, and that's part of why this whole setback is so difficult. It's undone in 2 weeks, a hell of a lot of work.
Yes, and I'll just cut you short there because that's what we're
Right.
going to get into in just a little while.
Sure.
And I'll move along to say hello there to Jen Peeples.
So hi everybody, Jen Peeples. I'm an aerospace engineer and a former military test pilot. I was in the Army, and I was an atheist for most of the time I was in the Army. And so I joined the ACA over 11 years ago, and almost immediately got invited to co-host a show. And within a few months, I was a regular rotating co-host on the show of the Atheist Experience. And so that was 11 years. And then shortly after that, I joined the board, and I ended up serving as vice president and president of the organization. And I only stepped down in 2016 because I started my own business and I didn't feel like I had time to run 2 companies. And it's essentially running 2 corporations. But I stayed with the ACA, and by then, I was doing Atheist Experience, and we were, shortly after that, we talked about a reboot of Godless Bitches. And it was a project that I really loved doing back in, I think it was, I can't remember exactly when we started it, 2012, maybe, something like that. And I loved doing that, and I wanted to do it again. And so I was on board when Claire mentioned rebooting it. And I think it was probably the best work I did as part of the ACA. One of the things I wanted to do when I was vice president and president was, as Claire was talking about, get more diversity in the organization. And one of the ways you do that is you get diversity on the board. People have to see that your organization is serious about that. And so I made an effort to reach out to people who were not cisgendered white men, and get these people on the board as much as possible. So I asked Claire to join the board a few years ago. I was also, one of the things I found about people joining the board, a lot of people go around and they think they can't be on the board of an organization like the ACA. And all they're waiting for is for someone to ask. And so I went and sought out the most diverse voices I could find. We ended up with a trans woman on the board. We had a Black man on the board who also happens to be gay. And, you know, these were not people who were token representatives of a certain demographic. They brought valuable insight to the board. And again, you know, we're going to talk about this, you know, later on, but I think it's something that we've lost, that the ACA has lost.
Indeed, yes. I mean, I think that is a broader overarching point, which is worth mentioning, that it's not a matter of tokenism. It's a matter of these people bringing in different life experiences. And if you're going to be a humanist, you need to actually, you know, look at the full range of humanity.
Exactly.
Yes. So, yes, welcome, Jen. Moving along now. Tracie, hello there.
Hey, thanks for having me on. And thanks for doing this. I first came to ACA when I was doing a comic strip called Atheist Eve, and that was a while back. I have served with ACA for 13 years. I've served as a host on Atheist Experience and a co-host as well. I served on both iterations of Godless Bitches. I've been on that since its inception. And I have served on the board as secretary and VP in all that time. And I wanted to point out one of the things that Jen just said about reaching out to marginalized people and asking them to be on the board. One of the things that is distinct about many marginalized groups is that they're used to their voices not being heard or considered important. So you do have to make an extra effort to kind of reach out and ask a lot of times, because the people that are most used to having their voices heard and to feeling like their voices are important are the people who you're not going to have a problem getting them to step up. And this is why it's sometimes hard to get diversity, because marginalized people have to really be brave in order to have a voice. It's not like it's going to be heard. When they speak their voice, a lot of people slap it down, and they're going to run into a lot of static that other people don't see when they try to speak. And to me, that rolls into kind of why I'm here today. And I felt like it was kind of important to talk a little bit about why I decided to come on, because people who know me are going to see this as a little bit out of my character. One of the things I had posted on Facebook was to say that nobody's entitled to know why I left. That this was like my reasons, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about it. I don't owe anyone an explanation that I served for 13 years. I left in good standing, and that's all anybody needs to worry about. But that's mainly a reaction to people that were just going nuts speculating online about why people were leaving and whether it was okay and whether it wasn't. And these are people that knew nothing about the reasons I left. And I just thought it was so out of line to hear people talk about something when I had made no statement, they had no idea, and they were just speaking out of turn. Now, anybody's allowed to speculate. It's not like it's illegal. But I just think that if somebody cares enough about why I left, the thing to do would be to ask me. And there were a few people that came to me and said, is it okay if I ask you? And I said, yeah. And so we talked, and I would send them links and say, here's examples of what I'm talking about that you can go and see that are publicly available to look at, so that you get an understanding of what it was that egregious to me. And so it's not so much that I'm not willing to talk about it, it's that I don't want to talk about it for people who feel entitled to know. That's the thing that bugs me. And since I've left, I haven't watched any programming out of ACA. I haven't initiated contact with anyone from ACA. I haven't proactively posted or said anything about it until just recently. And I no longer am active in the community. I don't consider myself an activist. And I want to just make that really clear. And I think this is an important point, because I do have like one or two loose ends to tie up, and then I'm gone. And I want to stress that in all the years I was with ACA, I was a volunteer. I never earned money for it. I rarely took any kind of stipend for any kind of non-direct thing, like a speaking engagement. So I have the luxury here of being able to not care about judgments at this point, right? So if people in the atheist community come down on me, I really don't care, because I got nothing. I've got no investment anymore, right? And I didn't even have an investment before other than representing ACA. So if I had been in a position where something went wrong with me and it reflected poorly on the association, that would be a cost, in my opinion. So I always felt like I needed to keep in good standing because I represent this group. At this point, I don't represent anybody and I'm not involved anymore. So I really don't care, right? This isn't like I have something to gain or benefit from saying what I think or not saying what I think. This hasn't ever been about me. And with that, I just want to say, I'm going to skip some stuff, but the reason that I finally did decide to come forward was that I was seeing people who were marginalized asking me, would I say something? And some of them were trying to speak and they were being shut down and censored and banned and blocked, and they can't give their accounts and they can't say what they know to be true. And when they do say what they know to be true elsewhere, I've seen them called out as liars by people who know that they're not lying. And this is, it kind of made me feel, have you ever read the book, The Scarlet Letter?
Yes.
Do you remember when Hester is taking all that heat and the pastor that she had the affair with, he knows he's the guy she won't name. But she's the one taking all the heat.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at it and it's like, I know these people aren't lying, but they're being called out as liars and the public doesn't know. And so I'm looking at it going, I can either keep my mouth shut and I have the privilege to walk away from this thing and it costs me nothing. I just have to turn my back on it and go. But these people are stuck in this because you can't turn around tomorrow and not be a transgender person anymore, right? You can't turn around tomorrow and not be involved in this and have no stake in the damage that's done to your community or to you personally. And when they're getting hurt for standing up for it and they're on the side of what I consider to be right, and I don't say anything, I don't think that's right. So I just wanted to say that's the reason that I decided to do this.
Well, thank you for coming on. Well, thank all three of you, because obviously it would be much easier to stay on the sidelines not saying anything. But you've come forward, and thank you for that. And just on a programming note, we were hoping to have, and I'm almost certainly going to mispronounce the surname, John Iacoletti.
Close. It's Iacoletti, yeah.
Iacoletti, okay. Well, it's American, so I don't know.
I think it's Italian, actually, but okay.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Italian American.
So yeah, but unfortunately he's travelling at the moment, so he couldn't make this one. But we may well arrange a separate show later if he wants to come on and have his say, because I know he's had some interesting points to make, but I won't speak on his behalf. So, in terms of the actual substance of the events, I suppose we start at the start in terms of chronology. A guy called Rationality Rules, real name Stephen Woodford, was invited by the ACA to, well, I think he was already on holiday anyway, but anyway, he was invited to come to Austin and take part in various internet, television, podcast shows that the ACA produce. But it would appear that, contrary to certain claims, people were already aware of his pre-existing, I would say, very transphobic video that he'd made, which seems to not exactly chime well with the supposed humanist values of the ACA. So, who exactly made that decision? Anyone can answer.
Oh, am I muted? Oh boy,
I can't answer it because I wasn't involved at that point.
I was
didn't
there.
know what was going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first Atheist Experience show that he was on, some people responded and said that they were not sure why we were giving this person, Woodford, a platform, and did we know about this video? And people on the board, including myself, we were getting private messages and emails from people saying, why are you having this person on your shows, or your show at this point? And I knew he was in town and would be in town for a while, and I wanted to meet him, and I wanted to meet the other YouTubers that were also here. There had been a Faithless Forum conference prior to their being in Austin to build community among YouTubers, which to me, I didn't understand, and I still don't understand. It's not really community. It's just kind of a club of people who promote one another. It doesn't feel like community, especially when it's not a terribly diverse community in and of itself. In any case, so Friday evening, he was slated to be on the show called Truth Wanted, and I was at the ACA. He walked in the door, and I said, "Hi, Stephen. It's nice to meet you. You've made quite a mess, and what are you going to do to clean it up?" And he was very affable, seemed very open to talking about what his video was about, what he was going to do with an apology video and so forth. And I said to him and the show host and Jamie, the president then of the ACA, that I felt they either needed to address the problem on the show or not have him on the show. And that sent some panic to the idea of not having their scheduled person to be on the show. And I said, just soft shoe it, man. We've all done it when we've been on a show. Somebody doesn't show up, you just do what you can to fill the air time. They said, no, we're going to have him on the show. And a couple of other board members were also there saying, I don't know about this. And eventually, because Jamie said so, we were voted down. They were going to have him on the show, and they were not going to talk about it. I felt this was a big mistake.
Yeah, sorry, just to interject. I think we should probably explain briefly that his video was about trans women in sport, and
yes,
made some really rather absurd claims. And I mean, I no doubt he was transphobic.
Yeah.
But in terms of allowing him on, do you think that was allowed because, like you say, there was the practical problem of having to actually fill the time, or do you think it was more a matter of exposure on the basis that he has a rather large fan base that might be untapped at that point?
Yeah, Eric Murphy felt that he had dealt with the complaints we'd received, and I didn't see how that could be. He felt that because Woodford had said he was going to have an apology video come out, that everything was fine. And the fact that I was receiving upset communications from trans people and other allies made it clear that it was not taken care of. But Eric Murphy was so, I guess, convincing or something. And Jamie, I guess, believed him. I remember that these were the sorts of things that were communicated, but I can't speak for them perfectly. But they both felt that the situation had been handled and that the show could go on. Woodford was then supposed to be on Talk Heathen, and Jamie told me that he was going to address the trans video on that show, but that Matt had said he would talk about it on the Atheist Experience that evening. And so Jamie didn't talk about it on Talk Heathen. And I don't know why Matt didn't talk about it on the Atheist Experience. And so at that point, this man had been on 4 of our shows with no acknowledgement of this extremely harmful video. And I had not known about the video until I heard from people when he had been on the first Atheist Experience, and I watched the video. I thought, oh, how bad can the video be? And I watched it, and I was just stunned at how awful it was. I don't know how anybody can watch it and think that it's just like an opinion and not harmful. And it was a horrible video.
Indeed. Just to bring you back for a second, you say that Matt Dillahunty specifically asked for the other show not to mention it because he was going to mention it?
That's, as I understood, that's what Jamie told me. Yeah.
Yeah, and then didn't mention it himself. Okay, well, that's interesting. I mean, obviously,
yeah,
we can't crawl inside the map, but that doesn't look great.
No, it doesn't. But there were so many. It was a comedy of errors, the whole thing. I'm on the board during all of this, and there are things that I'm responsible for that would be hard to understand unless you're on a board. But we can get to all that stuff as we go.
Yes. So, Jen and Tracie, how did you feel about that? Were you aware of it at the time? The anti-trans
Tracie,
video.
I didn't find out. I'm like the least plugged in person in the world, and I didn't even hear about it until 2 board members contacted me prior to my Sunday episode, which was way after all this stuff had already gone down, and said, "Hey, you may not have heard, but," and I was like, "Yeah, I haven't heard anything. What is this?" And so I don't really even start until the whole blow up is done.
Yeah,
Okay.
I found
Jen?
out about it. Yeah, I found out about it when some people who were still active in some of the ACA Facebook groups were contacting me by private message and saying, "Hey, have you seen what's going on in this discussion group?" And this was fairly late. I think this was shortly before the first weekend in May, something like that, because Tracie and I were about to do a Godless Bitches episode. And I believe that was the one that Claire had a conflict with, and so she wasn't there.
Yep.
So that was the week that I found out really the full extent of what was happening. And I was just appalled. First of all, who the hell are all of these, cisgender dudes who are suddenly so overwhelmed with concern for women's sports? I mean, most of them probably don't even pay any attention to women's sports, but suddenly they care whether trans women are participating in sports. And then, to go out and get this concept so wrong. I mean, it was, I just, listening to some of the comments and reading some of the comments that people were forwarding to me that were going on in these discussion groups, I kept thinking, this is like a textbook example of Dunning-Kruger syndrome, where people have a little bit of knowledge and they think they're experts at this and they're going to tell everybody else what to think. And it's that layered with a bunch of paternalism on top of it, thinking they have to protect women from trans women. And it's like, you don't have to protect women from each other. We're fine,
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that leaves a taste, is the dishonesty of Woodford and his ilk claiming to care about women's sport. People who've never talked about women's sport don't seem to have any interest in it, but all of a sudden when they think, I equated it to fat shaming movement in respect to the fact that because they think they have some sort of scientific truth on their side, which by the way you don't, but because they think they're on like firm footing to engage in bigotry, which is really rather disgusting.
I mean, for me, right, the whole thing is just a big ode to misgendering, right? That's all it is. And if somebody were to say, if you had a transgender girlfriend, or even me, let's just whoever, I don't need to choose a guy, but it's like if I was dating a woman who was transgender and I exclusively date women, and someone were to say to me, well, if you're going to date a trans woman, you might as well just date men, that's misgendering, right? I mean, that's what that means. It's you're basically saying that this transgender woman is a man. And when you say in a sports setting, well, if you're going to have women who are transgender compete, you might as well just not, just everybody compete co-ed, right? And that's what people responded to. Okay, I'm not even saying. I mean, I can't even say that was necessarily what was in the video, but that was the reaction. That people went on all these forums and started arguing that well, basically trying to argue that we should now be either putting young women into men's spaces or putting men into women's spaces, because because we're including all women. So in other words, if we don't exclude some women, we need to include men, and it's like this is misgendering people. And what the argument boiled down to was, if you have an athletic advantage because of birth, because you're cisgender, there's no problem at all. But if you have an advantage and you're transgender, then suddenly you need to be banned.
Yeah. There's 2 points I will just bring up on that. Firstly, as to the second point, actually, that even that's not necessarily true in the sense that one of the people who's been mainly targeted by this anti-trans backlash in women's sport is actually a cisgender woman called Caster Semenya, South African middle distance runner.
Yeah, exactly.
Who is intersex rather than trans.
Well,
so naturally
what's interesting is some people have made the point that she's cisgender because she identifies the sex that she was labeled at birth. So even though there's this idea of the chromosomal issue, she literally is also cisgender.
Yeah. Well,
she's a cisgender woman, and she's been specifically targeted and essentially driven out of women's athletics because of it, and it's disgusting.
I think she just won her appeal, though. I think she's back in now.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I hope so.
I hope so too.
We talked about her on that Godless Bitches episode at the beginning of May. And it was just, we had planned to do this. It was just very timely that we happened to talk about her. And the thing is, we don't know for sure that she's intersex. That was part of what was supposedly a leaked bit of medical information, which leaking personal medical information like that on someone is just gross in and of itself. But she's never made a statement about that either way.
Right, but I think the issue is that they're taking things that they're associating with maleness, right? Yeah. And this is itself gendering. There's no need to gender sexes. We do it as a society, but you don't have to.
Right, and we see this all the time. If a woman is too good at a sport, she gets her womanhood is suddenly in question. And it doesn't matter if she's trans or cis or intersex or anything. If she's too good at a sport, her femininity, her womanhood is questioned. And we see it over and over and over again. She gets labeled male
But it's generally, though, only these things that are, it's weird the way it happens, right? So women, I think, that can still, if a particular attribute can still be sexualized, then it's acceptable, even if it's generally labeled as male, right? So her high testosterone is not something that's sexualized, and so it's a point against her. And then a woman who bulks up for a bodybuilding competition. There was this whole thing when I was younger, when they started with women's bodybuilding, if they bulked up and looked like men bodybuilders, people would freak out. And so they started this whole thing about, well, should women look like that? And there was a whole point of, men don't look like that. They're doing weird crap to their body. Nobody looks like this except male bodybuilders. And it was with women, it was just like, why shouldn't they use the same judging standards? It's the same thing. It's like a competition. You're judging the same thing. But the women that bulked up too much, it's like, that's not sexy, right? So that doesn't fly. And they look like men. And yet, if a woman is tall, height is very definitely something that when you look in culture to culture to culture, right? That's an interesting thing. In some cultures, the average height of women is taller than the average height of men in other cultures. And yet, if you can sexualize it, like a 6-foot runway model, suddenly it's okay if these cisgender women are 6 feet tall on a basketball course. That's not an unfair advantage, even though it's also an attribute we label as male. Right? They're tall.
And actually, as to your point about bodybuilding,
but you can still be sexy and tall, and so that's cool. But if we have another attribute, like if a woman were to have excessive body hair, that wouldn't be okay. That would be a man. She looks like a man, right? So we judge these things, and if a woman can still be sexualized, then she's allowed to have that male feature if you can make it sexy. But if you can't, if she can't be like sold as a sexual objectified thing to men, then the attribute is just strictly male and unacceptable.
Yeah. And as to your point about female bodybuilders, and bringing it back to the Woodford video, he literally plays a clip of Joe Rogan from his podcast where he's talking about a trans woman bodybuilder.
I thought it was a weightlifter.
Weightlifter, sorry, apologies.
Yeah,
yes,
that's okay.
But very muscular. That's the
Right.
the basic point he's making, and he's literally saying it's a man. I mean, he's directly saying it's a man rather than
Right.
it's a trans woman or whatever.
And what's funny is the whole video is
Stephen
saying
Woodford doesn't get to just claim that he's not saying it because he's put a clip of Joe Rogan saying it.
it wouldn't
That's
matter if
in
that
your
clip was in
video.
there
You're
or not.
tacitly approving that message.
Right, but the whole video from start to finish is basically a call to exclude trans women from women's sports.
Yeah.
The whole thing is saying they're not women.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's like
And we'll
from
get on
start to
to his.
finish, it's just a big misgender
We'll get on
argument.
to his quote unquote apology video, but in that he basically makes many of the same mistakes. So
Yeah, I think we're getting off track though. I mean, we're kind of focused. I mean, I think the video's been rehashed and hashed,
Yeah.
and we agree. So
Yes. Okay. So
probably we should roll.
we'll move on then to along the timeline of awfulness to
Okay.
what was the high point of it as far as I was concerned, and if it had stayed just at this, I would have been absolutely fine with it. The ACA board issued a statement of apology, which you can find online. If I remember, I'll leave a link to it underneath. And the initial statement basically said that while they stopped short of saying that Stephen Woodford himself was transphobic, they said that the messaging in the video was transphobic, and the reaction to that was pretty extreme from a number of quarters, wasn't it?
Yeah, we got it from both sides. I talked to Jamie the Monday morning after that second Atheist Experience that Woodford was on, and because at that point things in my world from trans folks and allies was a fevered pitch. People were really pissed off, and I said to Jamie, we need to issue a statement that says we do not align with his the beliefs that he's got in his video. And I think I even said to Jamie at one point that he was viewing my reaction as emotional and therefore not giving it much credence. And then over the course of the day, he, for whatever reason, decided not to have a statement. And then the ship hit the sand on Tuesday morning when moderators quit. All the moderators for our Facebook stuff quit because they were upset with, I can't speak to why they did it, but they all quit. And so we definitely needed to have a statement. And we got together that evening and put together, I really wanted the statement to be very brief. I wanted it to say, we disagree with this video. It does not represent what the ACA represents, period. Something like 2 sentences. That's all I felt really needed. We started out with a giant letter, and then we reconstructed it to be the smaller one. And we all felt that the one that we put out was acceptable. It had flaws, and I wish it had been worded better, but that happens. We got hit from both sides. Some people said we didn't hit Woodford hard enough, but the vast majority of people who came at us were Woodford's fans and of his ilk, who said that the letter was somehow persecuting Woodford. And I was just astonished. This is a man whose job it is to be controversial and to be in the limelight and to be ready for people to disagree with him. And they're all concerned about his feelings and his reputation. His reputation was fine. It's what he was. And So that was just bizarre.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting word you bring up there was persecuted,
Mhm.
which I think rather sums up the attitude that he and his fans had had. Yes, I saw the note, and the person has been banned. Apologies. Thank you, Tracy. That's just a little note from the thing. Anyway, yes, Stephen Woodford and his fans definitely play. I mean, in an almost, dare I say it, Kent Hovind-esque way, decided to play a victim on this. And he literally, in the thumbnail for the video where he said that the ACA were denouncing him, which I don't think they really were, but whatever, he photoshopped his face onto that of Galileo being persecuted by the Catholic Church, which is one of the most outrageous pieces of, it's not even hyperbole, it's just bullshit. Just total nonsense. I mean, the way they reacted to this is if he'd burnt his house down or something. You just issued a statement saying you didn't agree with the one video. It was ridiculous.
Well, I mean, we're watching Trump right now saying, "Oh my God, they're calling me racist."
Yeah. I mean,
like,
Yeah.
oh, okay,
There's
you
some fragile white men out there. I don't
Yeah.
think there's any
Well,
doubt.
this
I
is
mean,
what.
Woodford thinks that that was persecution. He has no idea what persecution looks like. This is a guy who literally has spent no time ever in his life defending his right to exist.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? We're in Austin, just a few hours away in Dallas, right? 3 trans women murdered. One of them was kicked to death, or not kicked to, I'm sorry, but she was killed 2 weeks. She was shot in the back 2 weeks after she was put in a hospital for after she was kicked into a coma by multiple people, while a crowd of people stood and watched and yelled homophobic, misgendering slurs during the attack. And this was in broad daylight. This is what persecution looks like.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely worth bringing up that sort of thing, because obviously, apart from the fact that they issued a retraction, which we'll get onto in a second, the way in which the ACA have acted specifically about the issue surrounding trans people, given the current mood in America and the fact that obviously the horrific crimes that are being committed, but also the attempts by the federal and many state governments to remove rights from trans people, the timing of this from the ACA couldn't be worse, frankly.
It was
Well,
awful.
And I'll tell you, okay, so I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, okay? I'm a lesbian. I'm not shy about telling people that. And what I can also tell you is that when it comes to the LGBTQ community, the L's have been particularly horrible to the T's at various points in our history. And in some of the L's are still pretty horrible to the T's. And I personally have made it a commitment to not do that. Okay. These are women. We need to embrace them as women and and join with our trans brothers and sisters in the fight for their right to not only have equal civil rights, but to exist in public. I mean, this is really the fight that they're in right now. And it's something that those of us who are lesbian and gay have already been through. And so now we're at a point where people aren't really questioning our right to exist in public. But trans people still have to fight that fight every day. And, rather than turn our backs on them, we should be embracing them and saying, no, we're not going forward without you. And that's my commitment to my community. These are part of my community. They're not separate from me. And so for the ACA to do this now, it's not like they're doing this to some other group. These are my people. Okay? They're doing it to me. Just as, even though I'm not trans, these are my people.
Yeah, it's the same arguments, right? I'm seeing the same
Right.
exact bigoted arguments put forward. It's the stuff that here in the U.S. we went through this with racism, we went through this with lesbian and gay. We keep going through this same stuff, right? So there's the whole thing with like if a kid, and this is what's ill, is that in the atheist community, when you talk about conversion therapy, most folks are on board with saying, hey, that's crap.
Yeah.
This kid identifies as gay and you need to accept him as gay. and you're killing these kids when they commit suicide by trying to force them to be straight. And now they're doing it to trans people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing the same thing. And I'm looking at
Yeah.
it, and it's like the rate of, and this is what really gets me, right? So when I hang out on the threads, and I'm so appreciative that my trans friends will let me hang out on their threads or in their forums and listen to them. And one of the things you hear is a lot of talk about suicide. And the youth attempt suicide rates in the trans population are enough to blow your mind. So depending on how you slice and dice it, it can go up to 50%. And usually, and in the low end is like 41% or something like that. That is a ridiculously high suicide rate.
Mhm.
And for people to go out and misgender and to try to force them to be what they don't identify with, after we understand, like we've seen these gay kids killing themselves and everybody understands this is why they're killing themselves. And now we're putting the same pressure on the trans community, and I'm looking at this ridiculous suicide rate, and I'm saying, shouldn't we be people who step in and support them instead of piling on to something that's already killing these kids? Like,
Yeah.
that's the part that blows my mind.
Yeah, and you compare that to Woodford's victim playing about being persecuted when you put actual people being persecuted, and
Right.
you just, words can't express the full
But
level
there's
of
articles
pity
saying
I
they
have for that.
shouldn't be parents, they shouldn't, you can't get married, you can't, shouldn't be in the same bathroom, which to
Yeah,
me,
you can't even go
that's,
for a piss.
that
Jesus
echoes.
Christ.
So here in the US, we did this with water fountains. If you were black, you couldn't use the white water fountain. And now it's like you're trans, you can't use the women's bathroom.
Yeah, and
And it's
it's
the
even worse.
same
It's
stuff.
even worse coming from the atheist community, because it's precisely the religious bigotry that was used against gay people and against,
Yeah.
well, indeed black people in the
The
past,
whole gender
and various other
binary is
crazy
religious.
things that is now being used against trans people. So
Yeah.
actually, in standing up against this, you are standing up against those who would wish to enforce a theocracy.
Yeah, well, the enforced gender binary comes out of religion, right? I mean, it's that,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. People are just like, well, this is science. And I'm like, yeah, science a little while ago called gay people mentally ill. I mean, we have biases in our culture, and a lot of those biases, guess where they come from? Our religious past, right? That was what we saw as moral and correct and normal for people. And so it was spun that way, and now they've got the blinders on still. And no matter how much artificial crap people have to do to fit into this gender binary, which shows that it's not real, people still are buying into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose we should move on to the retraction of the initial apology statement from the ACA. And this is the point where I mentioned briefly before the show, I didn't want to make anyone in this chat put them in an awkward position, because obviously you still live in the same town. You've probably got similar friends than you had before and all the rest of it. But I think it's worth calling certain people out. Namely, one person being Matt Dillahunty, who has said that he personally opposed and asked that the statement be withdrawn. I don't know if
Yeah.
anyone wants to speak to that particularly.
Yeah, well, it gets complicated at this point. Because the original statement was not perfect. It wasn't what everybody wanted on either side. It was adequate, but it wasn't what we would have liked to have put together if we'd had the right amount of time. Unfortunately, it became a fire that needed to be put out. Jamie put together a new statement with the guidance of someone whose job it was to handle nothing but big problems like this, a PR person. And so at the board meeting, he presented to us the letter that they had so far. And people on the board gave their feedback on this letter. And there were a lot of things about the letter that I was not happy with. And Jamie took all of our feedback and said that he would be posting this as being from the president, so that he would be the only one who took the heat. He would go back to the PR person, go over the suggestions that we'd made, and go from there. And just issue the statement, the new and improved statement, with the understanding that this new and improved statement was going out. The board voted to rescind the previous one, which was a mistake. And we also, for a number of reasons, and I don't remember all of the details, but moderating Facebook and all of the other media that we had become pretty much untenable. There were just a few people handling it, and the people who were handling it were working extreme hours, and no matter what we did, we were catching just nothing but grief. And the board meeting was probably one of the most, it had to have been the most attended board meeting ever. There were, I don't know, 10 people in the room who weren't on the board. And there was a motion to temporarily ease up on moderating because we didn't have the person power, and because it seemed to be what people were calling for.
And but I think also worth mentioning that I mean I can't say I haven't actually read them, but from those who were involved, there's a lot of transphobic abuse that started flooding in.
It was horrible. It was just awful.
Well, I can give you, just to say, I'd like to interrupt here because like I say, I didn't find out about it till later. And when I did find out, it was still going on, right? So I'm after this stuff has already been happening, and the public pages were already just swamped with horrible like misgendering and just awful defenses of segregation, basically, and that's what it is. It's segregation. And here, segregation of women from women's spaces. And in the way that I found out about that, I don't even, like I said, I'm unplugged, right? So I'm not going to these spaces. I'm not hanging out at the ACA Facebook pages for any of this stuff. The only thing I did that I was active in was that every now and then I would go to our AXP blog, which is only visited by like regulars, and I would just moderate in case there was any new people coming through. So I would go in, see if there was any backlog of new people trying to post, and I would let them through as long as it wasn't spam or something really, really outrageously horrible. So I'm just going through and releasing new people. And then I go to Godless Bitches every now and then, and I would post like an article if I felt like it was relevant. But I mean, I'm not like moderating this stuff, right? And I'm not visiting the other pages. I'm not actively commenting. Right? At AXP, I might comment once or twice after I do a show, and that would be it. So I'm not at these spaces. I reached out because I was concerned to a trans member that was prominent in ACA. And I was kind of nervous about reaching out because I kind of thought, if they're not in a good space, do they want to hear more about this or even be reminded of it? Or, I didn't know where their head was at with this. And I wanted to know, I had my feelings about it, but I want to know from somebody who's in the association, who's transgender, what are your thoughts on what is going on? How is this, are you okay with this? Are you not okay? Like, what is this? And they came back and just said, I don't even go to those spaces now because they're not safe. And I need to look out for myself. And I just want to say again, hanging out at these communities, one of the things you understand, unsafe doesn't mean I might be offended. Unsafe means this could really negatively impact my mental health, because people that are marginalized and oppressed, their mental health suffers, and it leads to all kinds of physical problems, including self-harm, in addition to all the social violence that they have to deal with, right? So it's just a complete train wreck for them. And going and seeing a bunch of people in a community that just a couple of weeks before was supporting you, now attacking you, when they should be defending you against religious bigots, they're now becoming the bigots. And I went to the thread to see what was going on. And when I saw it, my jaw dropped. I was like, this is disgusting to me. Then a trans man friend of mine was one of the people that asked me on Facebook what's going on. And I said, here's the link. And he went and he came back and he said, holy moly, right? Like, that is some bigots. And I'm like, yeah.
And I think that's the point worth mentioning, and it's a point I've made on certainly on my channel quite often, because it's atheist, and I understand it to a degree because you've rejected the bigotry involved inherently within mostly Christianity, because obviously we're in the West, which is largely predominantly Christian, but within all religions to an extent, you think yourself above it, and often you can find yourself being tricked into espousing many of the same bigotries if you're not careful in avoiding so. And so they've essentially become the same bigots minus a god, and that's how I would describe many of Woodford's crowd. And I think that was borne out by the fact that those people who swamped your pages, the Atheist Experience pages, the ACA pages, were of that ilk.
Yeah, and I think for me, what's really rough, right, is because I mean, I learned a lot hanging out with people and just listening to them, and I had that same kind of confusion when I was younger, and before I learned some things, I couldn't tell the difference between, what is the difference between an effeminate gay man and a transgender woman and a drag queen, and it just seemed all kind of the same soup to me, right, when I didn't care about it and wasn't informed. But when you get into it and you start to understand and you learn some shit, you begin to understand what's going on and it starts to get more clear. And suddenly you're just like, oh, okay. The difference between not understanding it and understanding it may be minor depending on what you're doing with that information. If a person isn't going around spreading damaging rhetoric about the community, then they could walk around being confused till the day they die and nobody would know the better, right? But when you're ignorant of this and you haven't taken this time and you haven't spent any time investing in actual research into what these distinctions are and what they represent, and you start just going off with your ignorant opinions, and you are doing complete, like, just demolition damage to a community that's already vulnerable, mainly because religious bigotry has put them in a vulnerable spot, then you are helping out the religious bigots. It's just like when secular people get into intelligent design theories, right? And they don't understand that, oh, you're just helping them sell creationism. Don't you get it? This is a crappy argument for creationism, and this other thing is a crappy argument for segregating trans people and piling on as bigots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a very good point.
What I would have loved to have seen and didn't, except for a few people, and hats off to them, is the general public, whoever would say, oh, that's a very transphobic sort of thing to say. If somebody said that to me, and I have had that said to me, I don't go, no, it's not. I think this, and you're just wrong. I say, oh my God, what the hell did I do? Tell me. What? I'm so sorry. What did I do?
Yeah, if
you want to learn,
right?
If you're
being honest about it,
yeah,
you ask them to clarify what it was, and you try to understand what it was that came across as transphobic or whatever.
Yep.
You don't immediately get defensive.
Yep. The defensive thing is just something I don't understand, but it was all over the place.
Well,
and
I think from the male perspective, I can give you a little insight into that.
Okay.
The fragile man-baby ego of the likes of Woodford, as can be seen by his hysterics about becoming the new Galileo or whatever. They're not really interested in being corrected. They'd rather be confident and wrong than being potentially made shamefaced and corrected and actually learn something, which is fundamentally not very skeptical.
That's the Dunning-Kruger thing.
The thing is, I came at it as I work in project management, and I came at it as a project manager, right? So as a project manager, somebody comes to you and says, we have a train wreck of a problem, and they dump it in your lap. Because this is what happened to me, right? I get these 2 texts from people saying, hey, there's this thing. And I start looking at it, and I'm just like, what a nightmare. And my first question was, what are this guy's credentials to even be talking about this? Like what is his background? Does he is gender studies or, sports medicine, or what is his, nothing, right? There's nothing. There's no credentials whatsoever. He just decided to talk about this and spread this ignorance to a mass. And so then what happened is I looked at it and I said, okay, so he thought he had something to say, but clearly confused person. Let's go ahead. And I said, what if I reach out to a trans community activist and get them in touch, and then maybe they can since he's going to do, at this point, he was already saying, like, I'm going to do this correction and whatever. And I said, maybe the correction video could be having a prominent trans activist come on and sit down with him and go through the original video point by point, going through the problems with it so that it can be explained to him. And then I said at the end of it, he could thank the guest for being on and for correcting him and for correcting his audience and letting them be more informed. And I said, to me, that would be the perfect correction video, right? Perfect. And then I said, because here's the thing, if it doesn't get done right and he just puts out like another messed up video, it's going to be bad. Because you can't correct it. That's one thing I've learned is if you're going to correct it, you need to have your ducks in a row and correct the shit out of it. And it needs to be done right the second time. And this was not.
Indeed. Your suggestion would have been fantastically constructive and potentially rather useful.
I felt like at the end of it, right, we would have a beautifully corrected video that Woodford could be proud of. We would have the ACA looking really good for having brokered the deal, and the trans community would get this great fix, right? Like it would just be great for them to have, somebody who understands their issues going through it and explaining it and helping people understand the problems. And I just thought this is like a global win solution was what was in my head. It was just like, if I was at work and I came up with this, people would be cheering. But in this case, it was just like, yeah, no. I mean, now don't get me wrong. ACA was open to it. So I spoke to specifically Jamie, and he was open to this. And I volunteered to reach out to the activists and put them in touch, and I did. But obviously, I can't speak for the activists. I know they had a conversation, but nothing obviously came of it.
Yeah, Woodford decided not to then go in that constructive direction, though. And I think this is worth mentioning as an aside, he put out his victim playing video about how it was terrible that his ego had been, not his ego, his reputation had been exploited in such a way, a ridiculous thing. And then waited like, was it 3 or 4 weeks before putting out his quote unquote apology video, which I think shows you his priorities in all of this. Anyway, he did put out his, again, I will put it in quotation marks, apology video, his corrections video. And it was a shit show.
Well, I mean, he corrected like some minor data points that were irrelevant. If I can just put this real quickly, I know we've got a lot to talk about, but there was a woman in a town hall here in the U.S., like a political town hall, and she was a pro-life person, right? So she's anti-choice, and she got up and she said, pro-choice people have to deal with some facts and science, and she says, a fetus has a heartbeat at, so many weeks, and a fetus can feel pain at so many weeks, and pro-choice people have to, they have to face those facts and stop basically like pretending those aren't facts. Now, I don't even know if she was right about her facts, but let's say she is. It has nothing to do with somebody's right to an abortion. It's completely irrelevant facts. And that was the thing with the Woodford situation, right? It's irrelevant. The stuff that all the science-y stack of stuff is, it might be true, but it's not relevant, right? It's like it's true, but I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but just not relevant.
Even if, and I would actually say that some of it isn't actually even scientifically true. I would advise people to go and watch Essence of Thoughts, 2 response videos to the initial video and the quote unquote apology video, which if Essence wants to give me the links to those, I'll put them in the description for people to go and watch.
Yeah.
Picking this up later. But I think it's worth mentioning that you don't start an apology by attacking the people you're apologizing to, supposedly. Which is precisely what he did, by essentially being snarky toward trans people who'd called him out for his transphobic nonsense.
Right.
And including a rather large clip from a trans person who agreed with him, which, I mean, that is just tokenism at that point. I'm sorry. That's
well,
really
yeah, I mean,
shameful.
you can find train wrecks in every community. I mean, and the trans community is no different. If you ask anybody in the trans community, or most of them, they'll tell you that Caitlyn Jenner is a bit of a train wreck, for her political beliefs. She's still trans and everything, but there you go. So
but I think also
you can Donald Trump. It's ridiculous, yeah.
You can
Yeah.
also find people within a community, though, that are not as harmed, right? Some people are buffered. So
Exactly.
for example, I haven't suffered as much. I've suffered, my share of sexual harassment and sexual assault, but like most women. But at the same time, I know women who have been in much worse situations. And there's been a learning curve for me in having to come to grips with how much some women have endured this that I have not, right? So if somebody comes to me and they're just getting my opinion on what about this or what about that, and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't see the problem with that. Well, the person who's been way more hurt than I have might see a problem with it that I'm just not aware of, right? So when you reach out to somebody who is even in part of that community, it doesn't mean their story of how I don't have a problem with it doesn't negate the stories of the people who do, right? It's not like that makes it okay. We have people here in the US, for example, that are Black or gay Republicans. And look at what Trump is doing as far as racism. And there are people that are down with Trump that are Hispanic. If you're not the one being harmed and you have the luxury of not being hurt by it, you can ignore it and you can support these things and it's not a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't want to attack the trans person in the video specifically.
Correct.
Because
Right.
they're really not the big problem here. But
No.
the point worth mentioning is that Woodford is not your ally at all, obviously.
No.
I mean, clearly,
No.
demonstrably, he isn't. And secondly, he's using you as a human shield. That's really the point here. And it's Woodford should be ashamed of himself. I mean, that's really, really low behaviour. To start off an apology video to the trans community like that is disgraceful.
Well, and to correct things without really understanding what's wrong, right? You can't correct it if you don't know what the problem is. And there was zero indication to me that he was able to identify what was actually the problem, what was actually doing harm. I think he really just thought that there was a couple of labels in there that were misgendering, and didn't realize that the whole damn thing is just one big, like I said, ode to misgendering trans people. That's all it was.
Well, it was. I mean, yeah, and the same point you made about the initial video is that even in the second video, he approaches it from a slightly different tact, but essentially he's still calling for the segregation of trans people from the rest of society. Well, not society, but supporting society.
Yeah, and still trying to associate them as either men or not women.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So back to our timeline, if we're ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, the board voted to rescind the original statement with the understanding that Jamie would release this new and more clearly worded statement after it had been edited to best effect. And since it would be solely from him, the board didn't need to see it again, and we trusted that it would get done properly. So the new statement was posted, and it had not been modified in the least from the letter that Jamie had presented to us initially. And since it was from him, that might not have been a problem, but it was posted, and my understanding is that Eric Murphy posted it. He handed it. Jamie told me that Eric Murphy posted it for him, and he posted it as a statement from the president of ACA with support from the board, which was entirely false. And
was that a mistake, or was that deliberate subterfuge?
I don't know. I don't know. I can't say. I have thoughts, but I can't say. I don't know.
I mean, my personal view on that is that it was not a mistake. Now, what the motivation for that was beyond that, I can't speculate, but I don't think it was a mistake.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting.
And then the night before the election of the new board, Jamie issues the statement that says, in order to clear up any ambiguity, we unequivocally apologize to Stephen Woodford, blah, blah, blah. And that gets tacked on the top of that. So it makes it look like the whole board is supporting the notion that we are super sorry that we hurt Stephen Woodford's feelings. And that's all not what I was not standing for that, and I am fairly certain that most of the board was not standing for that either. But that's what was there. And at that point, I felt like the writing was on the wall, because that's where we get into the election, which was the next morning.
Yeah, just before we get on to the election, I think it's worth for a second just highlighting the fact that during all of this, the Woodford crowd were engaging in horrific bigotry that the trans community was just apparently supposed to just accept, unmoderated completely. And I understand that there are manpower issues and all the rest of it, but even so, it's still happening, and the trans community having to deal with that. And yet,
but these people are our allies.
It hasn't stopped. Yeah, I mean, it's still going on, and that's the problem. It's still going on.
Yeah.
And there are people who literally are saying, I consider myself an ally, but, and then they go on to spout some of the most transphobic garbage you've ever seen.
Well, but here's the thing for me, right? It's not resolved. And so there's this thing where it's like, hey, it's all over, let's just move on. And it's like, but it didn't resolve. I mean, basically what you're saying is let's just sweep this pile of transphobes in the community under the rug, and then we can ignore them until next time somebody wants to hammer trans people and they come out and start this crap again. Nobody's cleaning it up. So they're basically just, like you said, telling the trans community, just choke it down, except that you got a crappy correction video, you got like a really shitty apology, that you have a person who is not taking any responsibility or accountability for the damage that he did, and a group that had people in it that insisted in doing this damage. And I'm looking at it and I'm just thinking, and it's still there, right? Like none of this has been fixed.
Yeah, exactly. And but even to add insult to injury, was like as I was explaining, the trans community have had to go through all of that and are expected to just deal with it because they why should we bother being actual allies? But then you get Stephen Woodford, who has one statement to go about him that's mildly critical, and he gets an apology.
Yep.
Yes, exactly.
That's a slap in the it's a spit in the face to the trans community.
Well, it's like Trump, right? It's just like where Trump told he just told 4 women of color to why don't they go back to where they came from. 3 of them were born here. One of them is a naturalized citizen. The next day he issues a thing calling for them to apologize to him. It's just like, you're kidding me, right? I mean, it's unbelievable, the audacity.
The fragility of some people is remarkable.
It's
a privilege as well, isn't it? They get to be. They're allowed to be.
I'd like to add just one thing, though, that made me think of when I was talking about how Jamie was open to that idea of having somebody, me reaching out and just giving that a shot. One thing I do want to say is that I understand that there are some people in ACA who may still have good intent. I'm not painting with a broad brush. I'm just not convinced those people are in power right now. That's all I'm saying, is that I don't think they're at the wheel, or at least if they are. I mean, at this point, I don't know what's going on. But when I left, that wasn't the case. The people that had taken over, I have no confidence.
Indeed.
Agreed.
But there's a few folks that I feel bad for, that I'm just sort of like, I sympathize, and I'm sorry that you either came in during this phase, or that you've worked really hard and you still have faith that this can work. Good luck to you, but I don't have that same confidence.
If they're still part of the ACA, I don't feel sorry for them at this point. I think the organization has let people know what it stands for at this point. And so if they're in it, then, to me, it's like people who have always identified as Republican, and now that Trump is in power, they're like, oh, but I'm not like Trump, but I'm still staying with the Republican Party. So it's like, okay, no sympathy here.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, obviously I'm speaking from the outside, but I agree with Jen on this. When someone shows you who they are and you stick with them, I'm sorry that I mean, I understand there are personal connections and these people better than I do, but I can't have any sympathy. If you're still with them, you've chosen your side. Sorry.
Yeah.
But a point that Tracie made, which I thought was very good, and this is going to be a strange analogy, and please don't take it the wrong way, but the way in which the sweeping under the rug mentality within this whole thing. It reminds me, although it's clearly nowhere near as extreme in terms of the actual content of the problem, but it reminds me rather of the way in which the Catholic Church has decided to protect Mother Church than protect vulnerable people, that being obviously children being raped, for the betterment of the church. Because you don't want to rock the boat, you don't want to cause waves or anything. It would damage the community. And I'm sorry, that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, I'm just going to say I quit commenting on church cover-ups before I left because I felt hypocritical. So I just basically was like, I can't in good conscience condemn a group for doing things that I feel like I'm in, I don't want to say involved in, but that I'm aware of. And so I already knew there was this weird sort of, protect the, I don't know, but yeah, it's just, I don't like that attitude, and I do see it as like a religious leaning, and it bothers me as well.
I think it's a fair comparison because the harm being done is, I think, just as serious to the trans community, and the minimizing of the fight that happened before the elections to try to rectify this, and how everybody left, or not everybody, but so many people left because of all of this mess for one aspect of or another of it. To downplay that, it feels very much like that. And then specifically, Matt Dillahunty, his statement before the Atheist Experience a few weeks back, saying that, don't listen to the rumors. Everything's fine. We're all friends. And they could even come back and just everything's fine. And that's part of why I'm doing this, is because I don't want anybody to think that I left because, I thought there were greener pastures elsewhere. No, I left because I didn't want to be associated with an organization that couldn't see its own bigotry.
Yeah, that was the show you're referring to, was June the 23rd.
I don't know. I guess so.
Yeah, no, I've followed this saga throughout its run, and yeah, Matt was economical with the truth for the sake of PR. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Because I've spoken to various people involved in this, including obviously yourselves in the last few days, and all is not right in that ship.
No.
Yeah. I was going to say that I've had so many people read comments about, that they hope we didn't leave for something so trivial.
Oh, well, God.
It's not trivial to me. These are mostly privileged white cisgender men, heterosexual men who are claiming that we left for these trivial reasons. We didn't. I explained to someone earlier today that this is an organization that I spent more than a decade leading, promoting, and supporting. And if I thought it had any potential for redemption, I'd still be fighting for it. But I don't see that right now with the people who are currently in charge. And so for me, having spent more than a decade leading, promoting, and supporting this organization, for me to leave, that tells you that this is not a trivial issue, because I didn't make that decision lightly.
Me neither.
Yeah.
It tore me up.
Oh, yeah.
To leave.
Well, this is where it would have been really nice to have John as well, because he was treasurer for like 15 years or something.
He's been associated with the ACA for 20 years.
Yeah. You don't leave an organization you've put that much love into without it being an issue. And
unless
of course,
you feel it's
the arrogance of these, as we've said, the cis white dudes, to dare to say that, because it doesn't affect me personally, therefore it's trivial. Fuck you.
And you're just being emotional. It's like,
God,
my personal safety is kind of a big deal to me. So
that's something that gets me. I mean, these are really at-risk individuals, right? This is not like if you if you knew somebody who was on, you know, that literally like dealt with depression, dealt with suicidal thoughts, and you go in and you just start piling on and needling them in ways that you know are things that they deal with that are troublesome to them. I just can't understand doing that, right? Like that's what gets me is when I think about all of the conversations that I've been privy to in these threads and in these communities, and hearing people talk about how the slightest comment somebody made was just that one too many, right? Because they are so subject to constant public scrutiny, constant public fear. These are people that go out and everybody thinks it's okay to say nasty crap to them and threaten them, and like they handle this every single day. And we had Serafina on one of the final Godless Bitches episodes talking about that, about, you know, what made you come out, and it was like it was either coming out or putting a bullet in my head. And Sarah isn't an unstable person, right? Like if you talk to Sarah is solid, but there's this aspect of constantly being hammered for your identity, and there's research showing that this impacts your mental well-being, that it can cause depression, it can cause PTSD. These marginalized communities are not doing okay, and it's not because, just like with the gay kids, it's not because they're gay, it's because of the crap they're taking for being gay. And that's the same thing with this community. It is horrific what they deal with on a daily basis, and the slightest thing is enough to get them to be like, I had to shut down for 2 weeks because that comment or the way that person treated me or that thing that someone did was just the millionth hideous shit that I had to deal with this week. And I hear that, and then I see the disgusting level of vitriol that's coming out of some of these people, and the idea that we had a safe space for these people, and then they show up one day and they're just getting punched and pummeled on our threads. And this is not, like Jen is saying, this isn't minor. It's not like, oh, I disagree and therefore I'm leaving because this is, you know, an intellectual exercise for me and I'm on the other side of this. It's like, no, I know too many people who are really suffering and whose lives are really requiring support in order to keep going. And we're not giving them that support, and we're actually hurting them at this point. And I'm not seeing it getting fixed. And I don't see anybody saying, I mean, why doesn't ACA have like a trans activist come on and go through the video on Atheist Experience and talk about what's wrong with it? Why don't they help out? Like that would be a statement to the trans community, not donating some money or whatever, like actually have somebody on to say, here's the problems with this thing.
Although I have to wonder at this point, what trans activists would give them the time of day?
I think to straighten it out, maybe somebody.
Maybe, but
you know, I mean, I'm just saying, you know, and maybe they've issued the invite, but that's, to me, that's the thing from an ACA perspective. If Woodford won't do it, ACA still can, right? They can have trans activists come on and talk to them about why this is so messed up.
Yeah, they could.
That's what I mean, if people are still with the organisation, because if you were allies, ACA, you would have done this already.
Right.
Or something akin to it. You know, it's
well, I'm recommending it right now, right? Like this is my call for them to like do it. Show you really do have that support. Show your support for the trans community. Invite some trans activists on. Let them talk about what was wrong with that video. Walk through it with them and let them explain it.
And the thing about it is, so there were plenty of LGBTQ people that were accessible to some of the folks who made decisions about having Woodford on repeatedly. There were plenty of us who were accessible to the people who made those decisions and could have given them some advice on what to say, how to handle this, and advise them at least on the potential splash damage to people beyond trans people that they could be doing by not addressing this. And they never reached out to us, which tells me they're not allies. They're not interested in any potential damage to anyone in the LGBTQ community.
Well, they had a couple trans people available to them. And the one that I reached out to basically said that it was me, you, Claire, and 2 other people that even checked on them to see if they were okay in all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, I'm just like, what? This is an entire community of people around this person right here in Austin. And that's how much of a shit they gave.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
it's disgusting, and we will move on to the elections in just a second. But one aspect of it that we're having a more general discussion, I think is worth mentioning, is that not only, as you say, is it not getting fixed, it seems to be getting worse because, as we've mentioned, the moderation on their pages is scant at best, and you've got all sorts of hideous transphobic abuse. But if you
I've seen people banned. I've seen people banned for calling out the bigotry. Literally.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you call out either the bigots or the ACA or specific high-ranking members,
or if you post something embarrassing to ACA that is a fact but not what they would like the public to be seeing, you will be banned and told you should take this behind the scenes and talk to us about it. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, this is a group that basically said we're not going to ban the bigots because we value free speech.
But if you're a critic of the ACA, you will be banned.
Or told to take a less public route with your question.
Which you know, how could anyone in that organization criticize the Catholic Church or any other organization that has basically tried to hide their own skeletons in the closet when they're engaging in this kind of behavior? How can you be critical of any religion for doing that?
Yep, it's a fair point.
But I mean, I'm just going to say the ACA is not a safe place for the LGBTQ community. So if you're in that community in any aspect, be very careful about engaging in any ACA groups.
Yeah, and that's fucking heartbreaking because I always I assumed people like Matt Dillahunty and various other people, and your good selves, of course, although you have now left, thankfully. I always thought of them as the good guys.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, if you're still with the ACA, I can't describe you that way anymore. Not that I'm saying they're all universally evil or anything like that, but I can't see you as an ally or anything of the sort.
Yeah, just because somebody is extremely well versed and reasonable about one subject doesn't mean they're going to be the same way about another.
That's so. We were talking about it off air. The idea of the demonization of emotion in all of this, given that various people in the ACA have reacted emotionally by blocking people for daring to disagree, and Woodford himself put himself, like I say, it's worth mentioning it time and time again because it's so ridiculous, compared himself to Galileo. The idea that these people are just emotionless, completely perfect, rational specimens is ridiculous. And of course, if any of the women currently had reacted in that way, in the emotional way that those men have, you would be written off as, hysterical women. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, yes.
The elections.
Pardon?
The elections?
Yes, the elections. So, I think my cat's having a fight outside. I don't know if you heard that. Yes, the elections. The ACA elected a new board just literally the day after all of this. And the agenda of those present and of the current ACA was laid bare to the world, and it's pretty ugly stuff.
Yep.
So if anyone wants to jump in and take us,
I just like to say, I'm going to let somebody else kind of start it, like once they get into it. But just to say, this was another thing where I just walked into it completely blindsided, right? Like I had no idea that there was like controversy around the elections, that there was going to be any issue at all with these. I just thought, I've been to elections a few times and there's only been one weird thing that happened at the one prior. And so I kind of walked into this thing just thinking, okay, we'll be here for an hour, we'll do the voting, whatnot, and that's going to be it. And man, was I surprised.
It seems it was stacked with pro-Woodford individuals on the day itself.
The first thing I noticed when I went in was that pro-Woodford folks had rallied. There were a lot of them there. And the other thing that I was thinking would be true and was true is that all of the people who would be supportive of the trans community had left the ACA. So the base that was there to vote was extraordinarily skewed. And it was just a losing fight from the beginning. The writing was definitely on the wall. And I said to my husband that I'm not going to get I was running for vice president because I'd been being groomed for it for a year. And I said, I'm not only not going to get vice president, I'm not going to get reelected to the board. The only question is the process going to be vicious or adult? And it was extraordinarily vicious. And
In what particular ways would you say it was vicious?
well, across the board, anybody who stood up there was, not everybody, but key people were asked, did you support the original statement? And do you still support it? And those who said they did support it were clearly not going to get reelected. And I don't know how you could not stand by a statement that says we support the trans community and we do not agree with this video. I mean, what's wrong with supporting that?
Yeah. It sounds, obviously I wasn't there on the day, but it does sound a little bit like being asked by Senator McCarthy, have you now or any time been a communist?
Believe me, the irony was not lost on me that you had somebody saying I'm being treated like Galileo because someone said I put out anti-trans stuff, and that's the end of it. And then you have all of these people literally being stripped of positions that some of them have had for more than a decade, because they just simply were willing to say the video has trans misogyny and oppositional sexism, whatever you want to call it, and we want the trans community to know we support them. So do you literally the litmus test was, are you okay calling an anti-trans video an anti-trans video? And are you still in support of the trans community? Because that's what the original statement basically said. I mean, it was like Claire said, it was a long way around, but that's what it was saying. And if you can't call that video anti-trans, or if you aren't down with supporting the trans community, whatever part of it is giving you the problem where you think that this is just like worth clearing out your leadership for, then you don't share my values.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Those who stood up and said they still supported the trans community were the ones kicked out by the atheists.
Yes.
You think, what the fuck is going? Is this Pat Robertson town now? What's going on here?
Yeah, and I would also add that question, or those two questions, do you support the original statement, or do you still support it? That was a bit of theater.
A
bit.
There was a lot of theater.
You do have to have a show element to the show trial, otherwise it's just a trial.
It was 5 hours.
Yeah, it was 5 hours, which means that the elections are an incredibly undemocratic process because it depends on someone having the ability to show up and spend 5 hours sitting there in rainstorms off and on.
Yeah. And the thing is, they had the votes, right? So they knew they had the votes. So this whole thing was just a dog and pony show.
Right.
I mean, it was like they already knew what was down. One of them had a whole list of who was going to get elected that they announced right before, just to put it in everybody's face, right? And it was just like, okay, so they announced that here's who we're going to elect, and then they just let the thing keep going. Just to what? Torture people? Like, seriously, it was just to have some whipping time was really what it was about. It was disturbing to me to watch it.
It was basically a tantrum. So, those of us in the LGBTQ community get slammed for being all emotional about, people threatening our existence. But these guys get to have a tantrum at an election, and essentially punish people for caring about trans people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's appropriate we're talking about the election of that board because the president of the ACA has just joined the chat.
Well,
nice of you to join, right?
Yeah. Well,
I speak only for myself here. Fuck you.
And this is the thing. Well, wait, I just want to say, here's the thing. I'm saying what I saw, right? And I'm giving my impression of what I saw. And all I can say is either my impression is right, or my impression is wrong, and y'all acted in a way that gave me that impression. Because you either, if you had something else you were trying to get across, it didn't come across. What came across was, we don't support calling this video anti-trans, even though it is, and we don't support the trans community. Maybe there was parts or some, if there was something else about that statement that I'm supposed to notice, I'm not noticing it, right? It's like, if there's some subtlety or nuance to that statement that was so bad that you'd clean out your board of directors over it, what the hell? I mean, why didn't you make it clear instead of just telling them, do you support the original statement, which wasn't really wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. And having mentioned that he was stacked with his supporters, 2 members of the board that are now there are his drinking buddies from the Faithless Forums of Woodford's. Drew McCoy and Kevin Steen. So basically, in essence, patsies for Woodford. So the transphobes won.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed of the atheist community, but I have to say that the transphobes won that.
Yeah. There was a lot of ugliness, and I think that going over the blow by blow of it, it almost feels like theater as well to me, and I don't know if I want to do that. But it was
absolutely fine.
Yeah, it was extremely. Everyone got attacked, but I think it's fair to say that I was attacked the most. Would you say that's correct, Tracie and Jen? Or not?
Yeah, I mean, I just wasn't involved enough in it to take much heat. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. It's like, like I said, I feel like I had the privilege to sort of, not be touched by this whole thing. But when I see other people going down for it, and I know what I saw, right? And so that's the thing. It's like, I got to say what I saw if I'm going to watch people take hits for saying what, other people are saying, well, that didn't happen. It's like, yeah, it did. I was there. It did. Yeah. And I can't watch people get smacked for, I mean, at least everybody needs to be honest and agree on what occurred. Mm-hmm. How you interpret it is fine. If somebody has a different interpretation, fine. But this is at least what happened.
Yeah. And I'm not saying poor me. I'm just saying that it was particularly vicious, and it was obviously very personal, because the people who were, let's say, asking me questions and making comments to me was pretty, I would say, passionate, emotional, and even at times aggressive, which speaks to, I mean, I'm not even the marginalized group. I can't imagine what it feels like to have that sort of vitriol coming from you from all sides all the time. It was awful. It was awful. And if my little taste of it was bad, I can't even begin to imagine. And the notion that ACA is a welcoming, diverse place, it just shows how little they see what other people are experiencing. And it's heartbreaking to me.
And there's no one on the board now that can speak to, those kinds of experiences, because they voted off everybody that had a shred of diversity in there.
Yeah. And then the other thing about being emotional, there is one thing that I do want to mention, and that is that when people were giving their speeches before the election, once, I think for sure, twice maybe, 2 of the new board members were talking about the ACA and how much it meant to them, and said something about how they were getting somewhat emotional about it. And I turned to Tracie and I said, can you imagine what would have happened if I'd stood up there and cried? Can you even imagine? It's okay for them to do it. They can get emotional, and even over something as small as how they feel about the ACA. How about how I feel about the fact that you have been thrashing a marginalized group for 2 weeks, just thrashing them? That's something to get upset about. But don't get emotional there. You need to be level-headed. Only level-headed is allowed here. And apparently level-headed means willing to overlook the damage you're doing.
Now, if you're a white cis dude, you can get as emotional as you like. That's just passion.
Right.
Yeah, there you go. That's,
Yeah.
I guess, what it was.
And level-headed means I'm never going to be affected by this, so I can not care.
Yeah, a cold indifference to the suffering of other people, which is very religious, actually, unfortunately. But there we go. So, I mean, it's, I think, fairly understandable why you all decided to leave, but the first sort of final items on the agenda. You decided to leave the rebooted Godless Bitches show and speak now as, or forever hold your peace, as to why you decided specifically to leave that show.
That was probably the hardest decision for me, was leaving Godless Bitches. Because I still think that was the best work I've ever done as part of the ACA.
Yeah, I agree with that, like, easily.
Yeah.
I had even made the comment before that if I had to give up give up one of the other show, I would give up Atheist Experience without a second thought. And I don't care if there's hardly anybody listening to Godless Bitches. It was just rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, part of the goal with Godless Bitches, and I'll just go ahead and talk because I had mentioned this to Claire and Tracie when we were talking about coming on this show. You know, when we were first talking about the reboot, there were some people on the production staff that wanted to make it about, you know, like cast us as kind of the superheroes.
They literally were doing an intro with superheroes. Now, I'm not, that's a thing for me, right? Like, I'm kind of, I don't like the language of heroes at all.
Right.
And superheroes, so, obviously that's like way over the line for me. And so I kind of brought that up, and I think, folks were pretty supportive of it. And I'm totally down with, the production staff was doing their job, and I don't mean to, disparage them or anything about that.
Right.
But they thought that was a good, theme thing. And I was just like, no, not for me. Right.
Yeah.
Not heroes, not superheroes, nothing like that.
Right. And fortunately, Claire, Tracie, and I all sat down and talked about this, and it turns out we were all three on the same page that we absolutely hated this superhero concept. We really wanted the show to not be about personalities. It was going to be about basically people who were doing the work out there of, expanding, humanism. There's feminism in there, but that wasn't just it. It was also social justice work and inclusivity and all of these things that we really thought the community should be about. And so we built a show around that, and it was about promoting the people in the community who were doing the work to advance those ideals. So that's
and I believe
what
you were working on a show specifically about intersectionality at the time you decided to leave. That was a shame.
Yeah, we already had it scheduled. It was fun. I mean, it wasn't on, it wasn't a reaction, right, to the events. It was something we already had scheduled, which was kind of an irony, because, obviously. And
right.
What was another thing that I want to mention is that the previous iteration of Godless Bitches was about the intersection of feminism and atheism. And when we started this one, we had, Trump was going on. And my reaction to it was, this can't be just about feminism, right? There's too much damage that we're seeing here. This has got to be about more than just feminism. There's all kinds of racism happening right now. There's all kinds of anti-Semitism happening right now. There's like this, anti-Muslim stuff that's going on. I mean, it's horrific, all the pile of damage to marginalized communities that's going on, still in the US and infiltrating, obviously, lots of spaces. And one of the things that I said was I wanted to expand, and everybody was cool with that. And so we rebooted it with an expanded mission of just like, let's look at all the damage, not just, damage in this narrow perspective, but which, is kind of broad in itself, but, just kind of looking at the harm to marginalized people. That was the focus of the reboot. And so there was just no way. There was like no way that I could know that there was a majority that had gotten in To me, it was like, it wasn't just the new people that got in, it was the fact that they were voted in, right? So we're looking at a community of people that came and showed up at the election, and I kind of looked at it like, okay, so this is what they want, right? And it's not me, and it's not what I want, and so I'm not down with this, and I guess it's time.
Yeah.
Part of what I'm doing here is representing ACA, and how do I do that when they're really antithesis of where I'm at right now?
And it would have been especially sad in a respect, because it would have been essentially masking the horrific bigotry of certain elements within that organization behind a more progressive facade if you'd continued to do that show on that for that organization.
Thank you. That's exactly it. I just couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfectly principled stance. It would have been very easy to carry on regardless, but
it's hard for people to understand that. I think people want maybe for us to stay there and provide that platform for some diversity. I can't do it. It's kind of bait and switchy.
Essentially at that point you become a sort of I don't know, a feminist progressive human shield for an organization of
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And
I described it as feeling like a siren, right? Like with the public spaces being the way they are, I felt like if I were to be on a program that presented like this inclusive sort of safe space feel to it, and people came to the organization and visited those sites and then got the treatment that I was seeing,
the siren
I would have lured them
trans
there.
people onto the rocks of bigotry. Yes.
Yeah, I've got a little message here from Matt that says that I'm lying about him, and if I'm lying about anything, I'd sure like to know. And I'm not trying to be ugly. And the other thing is, he says I'm blaming others for decisions I voted for. I take full responsibility for everything I voted for. There are reasons why I did what I did. Being on a board is not as black and white as people think it is. There's so many things that go into any decision, and it's not as easy as you think it is. I think if anybody, try being on a board like this, and with this sort of pressure and this sort of stuff going on, and I don't regret most of the decisions I made. I do regret a couple of them. I do, but done is done.
Yeah, I don't want to put anyone in a difficult position, but moving on to the reasons why everyone decided to leave the Atheist Experience.
Right.
I think as a juxtaposition to what Matt said to you in private, it seems that he may have been less than entirely honest when he was describing on the Atheist Experience the fact he seemed to make out that everyone had left completely amicably and that everything was fine. And that seems not to be the case.
Nope.
I do want to say, there was a like I was saying earlier when I first started, I did post a thing basically saying it doesn't matter why I left, right? I posted this thing on Facebook, and I do know that Matt saw that, and I think that at least some of that got translated right into what people were telling me was being said, and there is this sort of I don't know how to put it, but like the phrase that it didn't matter why they left, or it shouldn't matter why they left, I've also said that, right? So I just want to put that out there, that I did also say that, and the feeling was a response, like I said, to the people that were acting very entitled about it, and I was just like, it doesn't matter, it's not it's not your issue, and do what you want to do. I worked for 13 years within this community and never got paid for it, and I never asked for anything from it, and I never wanted anything from it, and I never, and that's, I guess that's the thing for me. It's like I did this just because I wanted to do it, and then when it reached a point where I couldn't do it anymore, I quit doing it. Yeah,
and I agree with you that it shouldn't matter why a person leaves, specifically in this instance anyway. But when and various other people involved with the organisation misrepresent the people that have left and why they've left, that becomes the issue then, doesn't it? Which is incredibly unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've all now left the ACA completely, I believe.
Yeah.
Which is completely understandable. I think it's been answered to a certain extent, but does anyone here think that the ACA is reformable? Do you think it's beyond the pale now? What do you think its future looks like?
Well, I mean, I made my recommendation, right? It's like, just do the video, correct it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That would be the good faith, good first start. You know what I mean? To like have somebody on that can actually go through it and explain it and set it straight and, you know, put out some actual information about what the damage that something like this does and why it's important to stop the bleeding.
Yeah. Do you think that would be sufficient given what's happened?
I think that would be so much more of a sincere effort, you know what I mean, than whatever else I've heard or seen.
But that, I mean, I'm not in any way attacking. It's just a thought to put out. Even if they then do that, that's to going back to the Godless Bitches thing, of it being a kind of human shield of progressivism in front of a mask, if you will, on a rather nasty face.
I would.
If they did that while still having a board that's chock full of people who are at the very least okay with transphobia, is that furthering dishonesty?
I think a lot of when we're saying okay with, in my head, it's like it's almost more like I'm not sure they even recognize it.
Right. Yeah, I don't think
it's such an issue that people, if you don't take the time and the personal responsibility to go and learn about it, it's just not something that you see a lot, that you're going to stumble on a lot of information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it would not be sufficient for me, you know, to think that the ACA had rehabilitated itself from this fiasco.
Yeah.
And you know, seeing how fast the group turned on the LGBTQ community, I don't know that there's anything that could restore that trust. I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking to myself, how could I have been so wrong about people I thought I knew?
Yes.
About an organization I thought I knew, that I understood. And I was completely wrong about that. So that's something I have to work on, is, you know, being a better judge of character and paying attention when people start telling you who they are.
Yeah. I think I think everyone involved in this has room to grow, albeit that I think a lot of other people have much more room to grow, but so yes. So,
Yeah.
I suppose, sorry, go on.
Tracie has often talked about not putting people up on a pedestal. I think in this particular instance, I don't know that I put the ACA on a pedestal, but I certainly was very proud of the things that I did there. And I made assumptions about the composition of people there, what the community would and would not do. And so I've learned, don't put communities up there either, or organizations.
I think all three of you, and I think actually many other people involved, can be proud of the work you did with the ACA, regardless of how it ultimately turned out. I think you did some absolutely outstanding work, and I think you should and can be very proud of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started off by saying it was with a heavy heart, because people like Matt Delahanty I saw as like the good guys, right? They were often online. Atheist spaces are not very nice, and the ACA seemed to be an oasis of genuine humanism and progressivism, and no longer. And that's deeply, actually quite hurtful, actually.
Yeah. I thank you for saying that you felt like it was a safe space. I was wondering if I'd imagined it at some points during this.
I think a lot of people. I mean, I'm not even from a marginalised group, of course, but from those who are from those groups, who I've talked to, definitely saw it that way. And I don't think they can anymore, but they certainly did. Anyway,
yeah, no,
I suppose,
retracting that original statement, I think, just really went to the heart of a lot of people.
Yep.
And I feel like the fact that it's just never really been addressed since then, right? Nothing ever was really put out that kind of said, and yeah, the correction's not doing it. There's like, where is that support for the trans community? Where is the saying like, okay, we were expecting a correction, instead we got this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and but I am very grateful that you've all corrected the record, because when the initial retraction came out, and that was supposedly on behalf of the entire board, I, like a lot of people, were very, very angered by that. And then obviously it comes out later that actually most of the board weren't necessarily on side. So I think there were a lot of people individually who I thought less of, that I thought, well, actually, no, they're clearly not a part of that. So I think that's a worthwhile correction to the record, if nothing else.
I wanted to talk about one other thing, though, before. I know you've got wrapping up and stuff, but we had a call that came in when Jen and I were on the Atheist Experience together. I think it was like our last show or something, but yeah, so we had a caller that called in and asked us to, what is our view on it, and where do we stand, and what about ACA, and what is all this? And I had already made the decision to leave. I had put in notice, right? So, and I just want to make that clear too, that I put in notice. I went ahead and handled it just like I would handle it if I was leaving a paid employment position. I didn't just walk out, right? I was just like, I want to meet my obligations here, and I did. And this caller called, and I'm sitting there, and I already had, when I'd put in the notice, I knew it was because I could no longer defend the group's position on transgender people. And so the caller asked about, the positions, and I did not even, had no idea what to say, because I had my position on it, and I was leaving because I didn't agree with ACA. And yet and this is me personally, I want to just make this clear, because there was some confusion publicly about this. And I just want to say, no one at ACA said I was not allowed to speak or anything like that. But I felt obligated, as a person sitting in that chair, as a spokesperson for ACA, I'm supposed to represent the association. That's how I view it. That's my perspective on it. And so it was a really difficult position for me to be sitting in a context where I'm supposed to be representing the group, and yet my values don't align, right? So it's like I didn't know what to say in that moment. And I think Jen kind of took it and ran with it. And I was really just sort of blindsided by the question. We knew something like that might come up, but I think they were kind of screening for it. And some people were like, well, she wasn't allowed to talk. And some people like, why didn't she say? And so it's like, yes, I was allowed to talk, but this is why I didn't feel comfortable saying anything. I knew that discomfort was a risk, which is why I had already decided that I wasn't the person that should be the spokesperson for ACA anymore.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up, I had also already talked to the producer and informed him that would be my last appearance on the Atheist Experience, and that I would finish out the Godless Bitches episodes that we already had planned, because those were the episodes we'd planned on intersectionality. And so when this woman, I think she had told the screeners something, their call was about something different, which is why she got through. And then it turns out she was a trans woman. And so, yeah, it was a very awkward situation, because Tracie and I were sitting there probably with the same thoughts, that what we're going to say here to this woman is going to be at odds with the ACA's behavior of late. But I think I just finally said, yeah, trans rights are human rights. And that was it,
Yeah. That's fair enough. I think if you can't defend the organization, you really have to leave that.
Yeah, that's one of those moments when you know you've made the right decision to leave.
Yeah. So, any final thoughts? Anything extra you wanted to add? Any topics we didn't cover that you wanted to raise? Then now would be the time to do that. Anybody?
Well, it's just, this is something we've talked about a bit, and that is that it seems like, especially within YouTube personalities, it's become kind of a cult of personality. And I had seen this happening within the ACA for a while, and it was kind of something that was bothersome. And that is, it's this trend away from, doing this for the community, to put information out into the community and to basically build an understanding of what it means to be an atheist. And it's a trend away from that and into this cult of personality. And it almost feels like people are turning into the atheist version of televangelists. It's all about, how many subscribers can you get? How much cash can you generate from your YouTube videos?
Yeah, I'd like to just add, it's not even, I mean, boy, this was going on with speakers and stuff before it ever, even hit YouTube. Now it's on to YouTube. It's just sort of like anybody can do it, right? Like speakers used to get invited, usually because they had, something going on, if they were representing an organization or some kind of a project, or they had some sort of degrees or whatever. But now it's like anyone can make a YouTube channel. And the thing is, it's not. I don't think people are confused about. Nobody's. Well, very few people are going to make millionaires from YouTube, but that's not the issue, right? So it's always been about nobody's. A lot of people that are speaking at conferences aren't making tons of money from conferences either. The thing that people want from this, and this is, there's two ways to look at it. You can either say, I'm here to serve the community, and then this stuff kind of comes to you. Or you can say, what can I get from this community? And so you get in there and you start doing this work, and the goal is, what can I get from it? Can I get my rent paid? Can I get fangirls that I can have sex with? Can I get, whatever? I'm not saying, and people need to be careful when they're following these people about what it is that's happening. Is this somebody that shows like a humble attitude of service to the community? Or is this somebody that seems to be, like Jen said, the televangelist, right? There's probably people that are televangelists who actually are trying to serve. I'm not even saying that they're all, necessarily bad as far as their intent. But some of them clearly are, out for the private jet. Those guys are getting wealthy. But I'm just saying that there are things that are worth something that aren't necessarily financial remuneration, right? I mean, you get things from it, and you get prestige from it. I mean, you've got a channel here. I mean, how long was that channel out before you started to get like odd fan mail? You know what I'm talking about, right? It's like you get the normal people that are like, hey, thanks for your work. And then you get some strange things that are just sort of like, oh my God, you changed my life, and you saved me, and you're so wonderful. And it's kind of like over the topness, you know what I mean? There's like a difference. There's a different feel to it. And you can take advantage. You can take full advantage of those people if you wanted to.
Well, thank you for the advice.
No, I'm just saying. It's like, no, but you know what I mean? These are people that you could take advantage of. And so when you do a thing like this, you have to be careful with people, and you have to take some responsibility for the impact of what comes out, right? And it's just like it's not just about getting your name and face and whether or not you can get like special treatment when you go to some conference, or whether or not all the people fawn over you, or whether or not they'll sleep with you, or whether your light bills get paid. I mean, if you wouldn't do it without getting paid, or without people knowing who you are, if you wouldn't pack boxes in the back for that same group to make this happen, and have nobody ever know what you did and never get paid for it, then you might not be in this for the right reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And I think that I've learned, hopefully throughout all of this, if nothing else, that even mild hero worship is not a good idea.
Correct. Well, isn't it that it's the thing where you kind of give an inch, and then they take a mile. So if you say like, oh, it's okay, I understand like why people use the word hero, and then suddenly it's okay for them to use the word hero, and you start seeing it used for all kinds of, like, people would write to me and say, you're my hero. And I'm like, okay, you understand that I'm answering phones for a nonprofit, right? This is what I do. They put it on a camera, and suddenly it's like, I'm a hero. No, that's not what a hero is, right? I mean, I'm glad that I help people. If I helped anybody, I'm glad I helped them. But please keep it in perspective. I am a phone operator, right? That's all it was. I was answering the phone and having conversations and giving information and representing a nonprofit. That was it.
Yeah. But I mean, there have been people that I've really admired on the internet who've let themselves down over this whole thing as well.
Yeah.
Someone who I don't even know if he's involved in the ACA, Aaron Ra, had made statements to the effect that Woodford's video wasn't transphobic. And then in a private conversation I'd had with him, he said that he hadn't even watched it. And you think,
gosh.
oh, that's really...
That's disappointing, to say the least.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So, I mean, there are a lot of people who, for whatever reason, and like you say, I don't even necessarily think everyone who would do something like that is doing it necessarily for hideous reasons, but the idea of protecting either the community or your position in the community by essentially throwing trans people under the bus.
Yeah.
No, I'm not down with that. That's not humanism.
And I don't even think, I think there's a lot of people that don't even know that that's what they did. Right? I just think that the level of unawareness is such that there are people who do not get the gravity of what happened. It's like Jen was saying, the people that are saying like, oh, it's such a trivial thing to leave for. And it's like, no, man, this is like, do I want to contribute to potentially killing trans youth? And the answer is no. You know, and their lives and deaths are not trivial.
Yeah. If you're getting back to the why we do this thing, if you're a YouTuber and you say something that some say are anti-trans and you lose viewers, the problem there shouldn't be that you've lost likes or income. The problem there should be, why did I lose those people? What did I do wrong? And that's what I didn't see over and over again. And one YouTuber explicitly said that what we had done, quote unquote, had cost him viewers. It was having an impact on his income. And I thought, Jesus, wow.
Yeah. Well, the way I look at it, if I make statements to the effect of trans people are great, or at least are human beings and deserving of rights, and people leave, good.
Yeah.
The number's gone down, but the quality has gone up. So I'm down with it. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a shame that, like you say, some people don't see it that way. They just want the numbers for either for financial gain or prestige or power or whatever.
You're doing it wrong.
Yes.
If that's
indeed.
the way you want to do it.
Yeah, I've seen some things, right? Like, there are people that are in it for the wrong reasons, and just be careful. That's all I'm saying. You know, people need to be careful about how much prestige. Prestige, I define it as just like power that people give away to you that you didn't really earn, right? It's like you didn't do anything for it. You don't have authority. You don't have you have no real power over anybody. It's just they hand you this power for whatever reason, right? Usually it's insecurities in themselves. They see you as like this better thing, and then they hand you that prestige, and then by associating with you, now that you're so prestigious, they've got something too now. And it's like, don't do this to people. The people that are talking on a video, if you're seeing their face or hearing their voice, they're going home and, like, you know, putting their socks away and doing their laundry and, you know, driving to work and whatever. I mean, feeding the cat. It's like, these are people. They're just people, and people lose sight of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially me being here on YouTube, sometimes I don't have my socks on when I film. So, yes, any more for any more?
I don't know. I don't think so.
No, we don't. We spent. Okay, that's absolutely fine. Thank you so much for coming on, for being brave enough to speak your mind, because I dare say you won't get entirely positive feedback from
There was one thing, if I can just stop you for a minute. There were some people that asked me to kind of give them support because I knew things that they wanted to talk about. And I was just like, I kept saying no. And there were some people who were like, I guess they were thinking that I was worried about backlash. And I'm like, no, man, I'm out of the community. Like, I'm not worried about backlash, right? Like, I don't care, right? And I didn't have anything in it before. Like I said, I could always just step down. If something tarnished me and it was going to hurt ACA, I could just leave. I could walk away. I wasn't earning a living there. It wasn't that important, right? As far as how it impacted my life. And so one of the things I kept trying to explain to them was, if you use me, like, almost in the way we're doing right now, right? If you put me out there and have me do the story, what's going to happen is my name is going to be a distraction. And I still think that to a certain degree, right? I think there's no way to avoid it. I think that the fact that the three of us are recognized and we have some name recognition within this community is going to mean that we end up becoming like the target and I don't mind that aspect of it, but the reality is that the message is going to get distorted, right? So it's going to be this thing about now Tracie and Tracie and Tracie instead of here's the information. And that's the part that I wish that there was a way to avoid that, but I don't really know of any way to avoid that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you say you are now out of the community. Is there, what does the future hold for the three of you? Is there any chance of maybe a
free weekends? I'm gonna have some free weekends, right? I mean, I've talked to, there's some people talking about some things, but I'm really enjoying just like not being around that, and I'm okay with. I was kind of a reluctant person doing it, like I said, except for Godless Bitches, which I really enjoyed. But when it came to the other stuff, it was just I'm an introverted person generally. And so going to like the dinners and stuff was it was kind of like work for me. It's not that I didn't meet some people that I enjoyed, but it was just like, if I had my druthers, I would just stay at home and never come out of my house. So,
well, I would suggest, just as a thought, just putting it out there, some sort of reboot of Godless Bitches as a podcast, separate from any ACA thing. You may have to call it something different. I don't know if there's copyright involved there, but
there is copyright. The ACA does own it. Yeah.
Yeah, they own the trade.
Get something from that. But it's entirely up to you. Obviously, if you just want to enjoy your weekends, that's entirely up to you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, we've had some discussions about what to do next, and there might be a project at some point. But right now, I think we're all enjoying having our weekends back.
Yeah. Well, if you do start anything, by all means, get in contact and I'll spread it as far and wide as I can and all the rest of it.
I'm pouring more of my energy into Foundation Beyond Belief.
Right.
That organization really walks its talk, and I am super proud to be a part of it. Not putting it on a pedestal, but that's where I'm putting a lot of my energy. So,
well, that's good. I'm glad your activism is still thriving.
Yep.
So, yes, I thank you enormously to all three of you for coming on. It's a huge honor, and you're my heroes, I suppose.
Holy cow. Okay.
No, but on a serious note, it was brave of you to speak out, because, like I say, you won't get entirely positive feedback from a great many people on the internet, albeit that my audience, small though it is, I think generally will have received you well. So thank you enormously for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, sure thing.
Thank you.
And a quick thank you to, by the way, to my moderators in the chat who've had some stuff to deal with this evening. You're stars. Thank you enormously. And thank you to everyone for listening and watching. There may be a follow-up to this with John if he's available at some point in the future and wants to do it. And frankly, to anyone who's involved in the ACA, if you want to talk, I'm more than happy to listen. But for now, thank you all for listening and watching. Goodbye.